Welcome to ePathshala PG courses on computer science. In this module we will discuss about servlets and we will discuss about how to work with sessions and cookies. The objective of this module is to demonstrate about the and discuss about the purpose of session management, and we will also study about how to work with servlet cookies, and we will also discuss about how to do session tracking with servlets. Now, we need to know about why we need session management. So, actually we need to have the information persistent in the web server. So, typically any site should need to maintain two kinds of information, and these information should be persistent in the server. So, there are two information the server likes to know about it. One is that it is about the information about the session, and the other one is information about the user. So, session means that the time period during which the user, a web user logs in to the period the user logs off. So, during that period time we call it as a transaction, or we can call that as a session. So, supposing some user is making a purchase, then he would log in to the website, to the particular website, and then during which time the session would start and it would end when the user logs off. So, this would continue until the user would be interacting with the website in that particular transaction. So, once the user completes the transaction, that session would be over. So, this web server likes to know about the information about the session, and another thing would be about the user. So, the user information would be generally maintained more than the session information, like remembering the login of the user and the password of the user. So, this information has to be stored on the server so that it would remember the client when he makes further transaction with the server, or we mean that it is with the website. So, you would be doing many online transactions or online shopping. So, every time we would not be remembering the username and the password, and to every website we cannot do it. So, what we can do is some information about the username and the password has to be remembered by the server. So, the server would actually identify the client by his username and the password. So, any username and the password would normally appear when he is interacting with a particular website. It would normally store the username or the password in the corresponding text boxes, so that the user would know, or user need not remember those things when he is interacting with the particular website. So, such information you can call it as persistent information, or we will know that these information has to be remembered by any web server. So, now what is the purpose of going for session management? So, we know that the web clients are interacting using a protocol called HTTP protocol, and this protocol is a stateless protocol. So, each time when the client is making a request to a web page, the client would open a new connection or a separate connection to the web server, and the server would automatically cannot keep track of any of the records of the previous information about the client. So, in order to remember the user information or what he has done previously, or to identify the client, we need to go for managing the sessions as long as the user is working on that web page. So, the server cannot automatically keep track of any of the record of the previous client request, because we have a stateless protocol, and the server can also would not be able to identify from which client it is getting the request. And we know that server should be able to interact with multiple clients, and it has to handle multiple requests from multiple clients. So, in order to, but the protocol is not supporting, HTTP is a stateless protocol, and it would not make the server to know that which client is actually interacting with, or what was his previous interaction with the server. So, in order to remember all those things, we need to maintain sessions for every user as long as he is interacting from the period of his login to the period of to the time he logs out of the server. So, now session we normally call it as a unique identification number that is maintained between a web client and a web server. So, 4 ways we can actually do this session tracking between any web client and a server. So, the one way you can make use of cookies. This is a standard model for any structured document, and normally cookies would not be supposing cookies is not supported or it is disabled in the machine, then you can go for URL rewriting, or you can also make use of Java session tracking mechanism. So, there are 4 ways you can maintain sessions between a web client and a web server. One is you making use of cookies. Cookies is supported in Java and it is a standard model for any structured document. The other way you can make use of hidden form fields, and it is a standard model for XML documents. And the third way you can make use of URL rewriting, which is a standard model for HTML documents. And the fourth way is making use of Java session tracking API, and most of the work whatever we needed we will do it with cookies or with the hidden form fields or with URL rewriting can be done with Java sessions. Now let us look into what is all about each of these methodology, and we will see that what is the advantage of going for Java session tracking. So the first way I told you that it is about hidden form fields, and we know that we can create hidden form elements within HTML page. So we can see here, if you give the input type to be hidden, then that field is a hidden field, and normally to store some secret information you can make use of this hidden form fields. So the type would be given as hidden, where you can give a session ID and you can bind the session ID you can give a unique session ID for this web client, and you can bind it in the hidden field. So later on the server would remember the session ID of the client, or the client would normally interact with the server using this session ID. So you can give a session ID and put it in a hidden field. This is what called as hidden form fields. So the advantage of this methodology is that you need to know that how to read the servlet parameters. So only the servlet should be able to read this hidden form field, the value that is stored in the hidden form field, and it is also very efficient, which would minimize the repeated calls to the server. And if you look into the disadvantages, the information is lost when the browser quits or goes to another page. So this would be valid only during the time the user is interacting, which means that he should not switch over to another browser. So if he is going to another page, this information would be lost. And it is also useless for maintaining persistent information about a user. So it cannot remember a username or a password. So only thing it can remember, or it can identify a session ID for the client, and it can be easily spoofed. Anyone can in between can take this session ID. And since the session ID must be incorporated into every HTML page, we know that every HTML page must be dynamically generated. But it is good for session tracking, which means that holding a conversation with the user, it is very simple and it is very efficient mechanism. So this is a very good session tracking mechanism if it is making a conversation with a single user. And now as I told you, the web server can send a hidden form field along with the unique session ID. And when this form is submitted, what happens is the specified name and the value are automatically included in the get or the post data. So this hidden form field values would be added with the post data or with the get data. So the type, the request type can be a get request or a post request. So this hidden form values can be added to it. And each time when the browser requests back, sends a request, then this session ID can be used to keep track of the different web browsers. So this is how a hidden form field would be useful in managing the sessions. The next methodology is session tracking that can be done using cookies. So cookie is a small bit of text that normally gets stored in the client side, the web client side, so that the server would again identify the web client using this cookie. So this session ID, we need to do session management. So the session ID can be stored as a cookie in the client side, and to each web client and for subsequent requests from the client, it would be recognized using the received cookie. But it is not an effective way. So because many times we can see that the browser does not support a cookie, and it is also not recommended to use this procedure to maintain sessions. The session ID would be stored as a cookie in the web client, but it is not useful for maintaining sessions. And you can have an expiration date for a cookie, which would determine how long this cookie would remain on the client, the web client's computer. Now let us see that how to work with cookies, and we will also see that how you are doing it. So, we can to create the cookie we need to make use of the constructor of the cookie class. So, within the package javax.servlet.http you have a class called cookie class. So, using the constructor of the cookie class you can create a cookie, and this cookie would be created by giving a name for the cookie. So, you can see the first parameter is string name and the next parameter is the value of the cookie. So, you create a cookie using the constructor of the class, and the methods normally we use when you are working with cookies or set maximum age. So, we have a method called set max age. This method would be useful for setting an expiration date for your cookie. So, you can give an integer value. So, this would be normally set in seconds. So, the time period during which the cookie will remain in the client's computer. So, this expiration time can be given as a negative value or it could be as a 0 value. So, if it is negative, then it means that the cookie would remain as long as the web browser, till the web browser gets quitted. So, when you quit the web browser, the cookie would be lost. If you give the expiration value to be, this expiry value to be 0, then immediately the cookie would be removed. So, other than that you can give positive values that would be given in seconds, that would show how long this cookie would remain. And then you can also set value for the cookie using a method called set value, so that the cookie can set with a new value. And once you create a cookie, the two things you normally do. One is that you have to add the cookie to the response object. So, we know that the servlet takes two things, one is a HTTP servlet request and the other one is HTTP servlet response. So, to the response the server is now adding the cookie. So, within this HTTP servlet response class we have a method called add cookie. So, you give the cookie object. So, using the constructor of the class you create a cookie object. So, give the cookie object, use the method called add cookie to add the cookie as a response to the web client. So, what is actually happening is the server is creating the cookie. So, you will have a servlet code that is running in the server side, the web server. This servlet would create a cookie and would add the cookie that gets stored in the client side. And we know that the cookie is a small bit of information which is stored in the client's computer for the server to remember this client. So, you will now add this cookie to the response object which gets stored in the client's computer. Now, again if you want to get this cookie back, then you can make use of a method called get cookies. This method is available within the class called HTTP servlet request. So, this get cookies will return all the cookies that is stored in the client side. So, the get cookies method would return the array of all the cookie objects that is stored in the client computer. So, later on you can make use of a for loop to work with this array of cookie. Now, here this is how we can use the cookies. So, as I told you, you use the constructor to create the cookie object and then you have to add the cookie to the response. So, the response is an object of this HTTP servlet response class. So, response.add cookie would add the cookie to the response HTTP response, and now you make use of the method called get cookies to return an array of cookie objects. Once you get an array of cookie objects, use a for loop to read the cookie one by one. So, you can within the cookie you know that you store the name of the cookie and the value of the cookie. So, to get the name of the cookie we have a method called get name in the cookie class, and there is another method called get value. So, you will read one by one cookie. So, in a for loop you will put from I equal to 0 to that array dot length. So, cookies dot I, cookies is the array, cookie array's name. So, cookies of I dot get name would return the name of the cookie, and cookies of I dot get value would return the value of the cookie. And these are other methods that are defined in the cookie class. There is a method called set comment and there is another method called get comment. So, if you want to store the purpose of why you have created the cookie, then you can use a method called set comment, and you can also retrieve back using the method called get comment. So, this would store the purpose of the cookie as a string, and this as I told you, you have to set an expiration. This is very much useful if you are setting an expiration date for your cookie. So, you can set an expiration date using a method called set max age, and you can also find out the expiration date of a cookie by using a method called get max age. And there are other methods like set secure and get secure. So, set secure is to indicate to the browser that the cookie is sent through a secured protocol. So, secured protocol we mean that it is an HTTPS or it is an SSL protocol. So, this actually cookie, if you are using it, it can be spoofed. So, if you want to send the cookie through a secured protocol like HTTPS or a SSL protocol, then you can make use of a method called set secure, and you can also find out by which thing it is actually sending it using a method called not by which protocol. You can find out whether it is set as secured secure transmission. So, get secure would return a boolean value which should say that whether it is set as true or false. And now let us see about one example for how to create the cookies and to work with cookies. So, as I told you, you will write, normally you write a HTML code or a HTML page which would be displayed in your browser, and from the browser you give an action which would invoke your servlet that is stored in the server side, that would execute on the web server. So, this is your index.html, and you want to invoke a servlet called add cookie servlet. So, normally you have to give an URL. In the action tag you have to say where your servlet has to get executed, the URL of the servlet execution. So, this is here we have just used the name of the servlet which would be invoked on with the request from this HTML page. And now we have a text that is displayed in the browser as enter a value for my cookie, and then we have two things in this browser displayed in the form, like we have a text box, and then the name of the text box is data, and we would have a submit button, and the value of the submit button is we have given as capital S, which is submit. So, this would be displayed in your browser. So, here we can see that the text enter a value for my cookie, and we design a text box, and we have another button called submit button. Now, this is what shown in the client side, that is in the browser side. Now, you would make an action to in this web page by clicking on the submit button. So, on clicking of the submit button, the action whatever you have given in the form tag would get executed. So, in the form you have said that it has to execute a servlet called add cookie servlet. So, now let us see what code you are going to write in the add cookie servlet. So, add cookie servlet is a servlet page that would execute on the server side in the web server. So, you write a servlet page. So, this is a class called add cookie servlet that extends HTTP servlet, and then you have a method called process request. So, we know that once a request is given to a servlet, it invokes, it is a HTTP servlet. So, it invokes either a do get or a do post depending upon the request type to be get or post. Now, this process request is a method that would be called from a do get or a do post, whichever method that is request type that is given in the form tag. So, now process request takes two things like HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. And the two steps which is very essential when you start writing your servlet page, one is you need to set the content type with the response object, and the content type is going to be in HTML, because the HTML is what that is displayed in the browser side. So, your response is going to be an HTML page. And the second step what you have to do is you have to create a print writer object so that you can print the data or write data to the output stream. So, to get an output stream you want to use a method called getWriter. This getWriter would return a print writer object. So, and within the print writer class you have a method called println. So, you can make use of println method to write data to the output stream. So, now add cookie servlet page, we are writing it to add the cookie to the client. So, what we are doing is we read the parameter that is given in the text box. So, in the text box you will enter some value. So, the name of the text box is actually given as data. So, we give the name of the parameter in the method called getParameter, and you retrieve the value that is stored in the form element. So, string data, this is nothing but the value that is you enter in the text box. And once you retrieve the data from the servlet, you want to create a cookie with this data. So, to create a cookie, you use a constructor of the cookie class. So, now you create new cookie object and give the name of the cookie as my cookie, and this is a string, you can give any name, and the value you want to store in this cookie is data. So, whatever you have entered in the text box is now stored as a cookie. Now, you create a cookie object, and now after you create a cookie object, you have to add the cookie. So, the addition cookie would be added to the response object. So, you use a method called add cookie and give the cookie object. So, cookie object is the what that takes that would be taken by this add cookie method. So, you give the cookie object and then you add the cookie to the response. So, you have returned this cookie to the response object. This would get stored in the client side. So, cookies normally would be some text data that would be stored in the client side. So, the server is the one which is actually storing the client about the client information in the client side. Once you have added the cookie, now you have an output saying that the cookie has been set to. So, this is what that is shown in the again back in the client page. So, in the client page you will have this data that is printed, my cookie has been set to, and you are printing what data, the data that you have stored in the text box. So, the data would get printed. So, now after you print the data, then you will have a link in the page. So, you are giving using an anchor tag, you create a link in this page, in the web page, and in the link you give a URL saying that you want to call the servlet page called get cookies servlet. So, we will write another servlet program that would be invoked when you click the link. So, now the output would be displayed like this. So, the text information that is given in the HTML as my cookie has been set to, and the text information what you have stored in the previous page is hello cookie. So, this is actually stored as a cookie object and it gets that is what displayed in the browser, that is in the client side. And you include a link in the web page, you have written, you write, you have a anchor tag. So, you include a link. On clicking this link, you have given the URL that is making a call to the another servlet called get cookies servlet. So, you can see that it is a link, it is an anchor tag whose URL is given as the call to the, it invokes another servlet called get cookies servlet. So, you click here and you can see that you make a, you click here, this would invoke another servlet called get cookies servlet. So, you write another servlet program to retrieve back the cookie. So, one servlet code we have written to add the cookie, there is another servlet program through which you are trying to get the cookies that is stored in the client side. So, now coming to get cookies servlet, it is a HTTP servlet, and again you use the method called process request, but this method is not the lifecycle method. The lifecycle method you have a do get or do post. From the do get we are actually calling the process request method. So, we define a method called process request which takes two parameters like HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response, and as usual you write the code as set content type to be an HTML, and you create a print writer object by using a method called get writer. Now, the thing is that you want to retrieve back the cookies. So, to retrieve the cookies you need to make use of a method called get cookies. Get cookies is a method that is available in the HTTP servlet request class. So, with the request object you invoke the method called get cookies. This would return an array of cookie object that is stored in the client side. Now, you want to read the cookie one by one. So, to read the cookie you use a for loop. So, cookie is an array. So, cookie dot length, it is not a method, it is a property of the array, and then use this loop, it goes from 0 to till the end of the array, and then now you want to get the name of the cookie and the value of the cookie. So, the name of the cookie can be retrieved using a method called get name, and the value of the cookie would be retrieved using a method called get value. So, cookie of 0 dot get name, cookie of 0 dot get value, again it goes in the for loop, cookie of 1 dot get name and cookie of 1 dot get value. As it reads each and every cookie, it is printing the value, the name of the cookie and the value of the cookie to the response object. So, you are this get cookie servlet is retrieving the cookies and then it is writing the response back to the client. So, all these information after reading the value of the cookie and the name of the cookie, it is writing the response back to the client. So, you can see that it's whole HTML code that is written which would be again displayed in the client side. So, now as I told you, remember that process request is a method that is called from a do get method or by from a do post method. So, we have defined both the methods do get and do post, which means that in the form you can either make a request as a get request or a post request. If it is a get request, it would invoke the do get method. If it is a post request, it would invoke the do post. Both will do the same thing. So, from a do get you make a call to this method called process request, and from a do post you make a request to the process request. So, either this method or this method would get invoked. And now coming to the output of this code. So, we have retrieved the cookie name and the value of the cookie. So, the cookie name we have stored as my cookie and the value is going to be hello cookie. So, hello cookie is the one which we have initially entered in our text box. So, from the text box we have read the value, we have made as a cookie and we have added to the response by which it is getting stored in the client side, and again we write a servlet code which would retrieve the cookie and then read the cookie value, and it is now showing back to the client side. So, this is how your username or the password is remembered by the server, which means that whenever the client is interacting with the server, the client can see his username automatically coming in the text box. So, you normally have a pop-up window which would say that do you want to remember the password. So, if you give an OK, then that particular servlet would get executed, which would store the username and the password in the client side, and when the client is again interacting with the same website, you can see it remembers the username and the password. So, this is a very simple example which shows that how it is remembering this simple value. So, as I told you, this cookies is not the solution to manage the sessions. So, session tracking can be efficiently done if you make use of Java sessions API that is supported with servlets. So, cookies would be if whenever the cookies are disabled, we can see that the URL rewriting would be performing better than this cookies. Okay. So, the three methodologies, one is that using URL rewriting, one is hidden form field, and using the cookies you can actually remember the information. So, you can store information about the user in the client side. And now this is a web.xml file. So, whenever you execute a servlet, you need to write this web.xml, and this web.xml file would be stored within this web.inf. So, in the previous class I have said that how to implement the servlet. So, there we have seen that the hierarchy of packages we need to create, and within which you will have a file called web.xml. This is for configuring your servlet. So, this web.xml, normally you have to give two things. One is the name of the servlet and the URL. So, we use these two things, the servlet and the servlet mapping, which you create in your web.xml file. So, in the servlet you have actually written two things. One is an add cookie servlet and the other servlet is get cookie servlet. So, the name of the servlet class, it is a dot class file name add cookie servlet, and get cookie servlet is the name of the class name of the second servlet. So, for the two servlet we have given a mapping as well as the URL pattern. This is stored as the web.xml file, and all these things should be given within a tag called web app. Okay. So, this is the configuration file. This normally you can see that this is available within a folder called conf in your Apache Tomcat, but we can write this web.xml file and we can store it within your web.inf folder, and using which it will know that which servlet to invoke. When you give an action in the client side, the servlet that has to be invoked would be known only if you write this web.xml file. And the next method is the third way of handling session is that URL rewriting. So, using URL rewriting you can append some extra data to the end of each URL that would identify the session. So, the server normally can associate a session ID with the data it has to be stored about the session. But the drawback of this methodology is that it generates every URL dynamically to assign a session ID. So, where page is simple static HTML page, and if the user has cookies turned off, then we can make use of this method URL rewriting, and it is only a backup for cookies. And URL rewriting would normally would add the session ID at the end of every URL. So, you can see that along with the URL plus you can see the session ID would be entered, and this is almost automatic, but cookies must fail, only then this would work. So, normally we can encode along the URL. So, to explicitly encode to URL, we can use a method called encode URL. So, this is within the class called HTTP servlet response. So, with the response object, you use a method called encode URL and give your URL. So, this can be, the session ID can be appended along with the URL. So, now the benefits of session management is one thing is that personalization. So, it would be possible for e-businesses to communicate effectively with their customers, and it also improves the user's ability to locate desired products and services. The other thing is that the privacy. So, the trade-off would exist between personalized e-business service and protection of privacy, and it can also recognize the clients. So, to provide this personalized services to consumers, we can, in e-businesses, when they are doing e-businesses, they would be able to recognize clients when they request information from a site. We can summarize. So, here in this module, I have explained about the need for session management, what is the purpose of it, and we have seen the different methodologies that are existing for doing session management. And in this method, we have explained about the first 3 methodologies of session tracking, like URL rewriting. We have seen about hidden form fields and about cookies. Thank you.